One quick note on our reading this morning. The lectionary, the kind of 3-year cycle that we use, does something kind of weird with the text this week. There's 3 sections to this. There's salt, there's light, and then there's something completely different on the end of it. That something completely different we're going to tackle next week because that goes along more with that passage, and we're going to stick to salt and light this morning. So on that note, each of us, I think, has a certain affinity for salt. Some of us are quite fond of it, while others like only a little bit on our food. But have you ever eaten a meal that doesn't have any salt on it? Now, I'm not a huge fan of salt myself, but I remember as a kid when my grandfather was put on a salt-free diet. And I spent a lot of time at their house, and we frequently ate meals together. But the first time after his diet was ordered was not a pleasant one for my young palate. Normally, I love the food at their house, but this was something entirely different. It all looked the same, but it was just boring. There was nothing special about it, like a soda that had been sitting out for too long and gone flat. Salt has the ability to bring out the good in food. And theologian Marcia Riggs says that, like salt, the disciples' capacity to elicit goodness as they participate in God's work on earth should be of profound consequence in the ways that we find that are listed in the Beatitudes. And I would say that by extension, Jesus is calling us to do the same thing in our lives and ministries, to bring out the best. In a way, salt adds to and upsets the balance of the flavors in a dish. And that's what our calling is as well, to disrupt and improve the status quo in favor of those who are listed in the Beatitudes that we read last week. The poor, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, and the persecuted. And if we don't do that, if we don't act justly and love mercy and walk humbly with God, we are, as Jesus said, like salt that's lost its flavor. And then what good are we? Now, I know that probably sounds a little bit harsh, but it's kind of the point, too. There's an old trick in woodworking where if you're going to glue 2 pieces of wood together on their large faces, you sprinkle a bit of salt on top of the glue before you put them together, and it prevents them from slipping when you clamp it up. Salt may taste good in moderation, but it also has grit. And sometimes we need to be told the uncomfortable things while still being loved. And to that end, the salt analogy, I think, holds true. Let's maybe look at it from kind of a pastoral perspective. One of my roles is to support and affirm those who are under my care. But sometimes my pastoral response has to be one of confrontation. Just like we read about in Paul's letters to various churches, people today still have to be corrected if they're not acting in ways that match up with the teachings of Jesus, especially if they impact others in our community. Jesus often showed this combination of qualities in his discussions with people that he met. He was able to both accept and challenge folks at the same time. He accepted the rich young man and challenged him to give away all his possessions. He was able to accept the woman accused of adultery, and challenged her not to sin anymore. we are able to uplift and affirm people while at the same time inspire and challenge them to make meaningful changes to their behavior. But another quality of salt is its ability to preserve. And it may be something of a paradox, but the ability to be salt in someone else's life, to be the catalyst for change towards the better, is also the thing that helps keep that person alive. It takes the gospel news of freedom and wholeness and lets it sink down deep into our bones. Now, in the second part of our reading, Jesus switches to a different metaphor, as he is wont to do. He uses a metaphor for discipleship of light. And while salt is earthy and concrete, urging us to develop close personal relationships with people, light is something much more abstract, which I guess kind of makes sense, given that Jesus was talking about a much more broad part of discipleship. Because light's a kind of a fascinating thing. It's visible, and yet we don't notice it unless it's compared with darkness. You can say this room is bright, knowing that it's so because of light. But you can't say here is light unless you're pointing directly at the source of it. Yet, it brings out the vibrancy of colors. It feeds and nourishes plant life. It allows us to read when it's otherwise dark. And with the use of circuitry, it can be converted into electricity or various other things. So how can one be light? I feel this is actually probably one of the best metaphors that somebody could use for the work of discipleship. It's both visible and invisible, all at the same time. There's a kind of duality that speaks to a surface level task of making God's work visible, which we should be doing, but also at the same time something much, much deeper, bringing illumination into the places of darkness within inside ourselves. Now, when I have heard this passage preached throughout my life, it's always been from the standpoint of not hiding your talents and gifts under a basket, as the text says. It's been used to encourage people not to forsake what they've been given by God and to use those gifts to their fullest. And I don't think that that's wrong at all, but I don't think it really gives the full measure of the passage either. Like in my case, where I've heard this a million times about my introverted nature and my own perceived lack of public speaking ability. The core idea isn't to be a spotlight on yourself, but a lighthouse that directs people towards the source. Yes, we should use our abilities to the best that we can in service to God. But there are whole swaths of this world that are broken. Places and people who are in the dark, metaphorically speaking. They're right next door or down the street, maybe even within our own families. And Jesus specifically calls us to reflect God's light into these areas. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it's the illumination of truth, the light by which we can truly see God for who they are. When you're bogged down in the darkness of selfishness and greed, or caught up in that quagmire of loneliness, or just plain ignorance of who God is, seeing things in a new light can be literally life-changing. We're able to be that light to others when they need it. And the great thing is, we don't have to know how to do it. We just have to be willing and open to doing it. God will provide the rest. Just by living in a way that reflects the teachings of Jesus, we bring that light into people's lives. But we also can't reach those dark places if we aren't willing to travel there ourselves. It doesn't mean that we slip into those same traps, but rather that we're willing to confront them. We're willing to get in the fight. We have to be ready to maybe be a little uncomfortable or have conversations that might be a bit unsettling. And if we aren't, that's what Jesus is talking about when he says not to hide our light under the basket. We'll do no good if we can't be honest or we try to hide the light that God shines through us. At the same time, though, we need to acknowledge that there is darkness within our own selves as well. Just because we believe in God and follow the teachings of Jesus doesn't mean that we have it all figured out, that there's no areas of our lives that couldn't do with a little bit of light. Being willing to dive deep into our own dark waters is a good thing, and one that shouldn't be feared. It should be embraced. Your own small light may not seem like it has much to offer in terms of bringing that radiating warmth and light to someone who needs it. I get that. But here's something to think about. If you're in a room with no lights and one candle is lit, it seems like daylight in comparison, doesn't it? It may be true that your own light is small. It may be true that you don't have many talents in terms of ministry training or skills, but it's also true that you bring that what you bring to light up another person's life, as small as it might be, might look like a bonfire that overwhelms them. Showing God's light is less often about grand gestures and more about consistency of character in the unseen moments. It looks like showing up for somebody when they need somebody to listen to. It looks like integrity even when no one is watching. And it looks like building others up even when they aren't in the room. It looks like seeking reconciliation and offering forgiveness, or offering a perspective of hope and grace. It looks like emulating Jesus at every opportunity and being so authentic that people wonder why you're different. No matter which metaphor speaks to you in the moment, and it may come at different times, they both speak to the same idea. Remaining in stasis, just keeping still, is not an option. The Christian life requires movement and upsetting of the normal order of things. I believe that God is not content with stagnated growth. They are always pushing us to do things a little differently than the world says we should. Pushing those edges means that we may find ourselves in uncomfortable positions or places that we wouldn't expect. But as we leave this place today, remember that you aren't just carrying a message. You are the salt that prevents the world from rotting into cynicism. You are the light that refuses to let the shadows of despair have the final word. Don't worry about being a massive salt mine or a blinding bonfire. Just be the grain of salt in a bitter conversation. Be the single candle in a dark room. Upset the balance of the status quo with a little bit of grace. Disrupt the darkness with a flicker of hope. Go out and be exactly what Jesus said you already are. Don't hide the grit of your salt or the glow of your light under a basket of your own comfort. Let us go into the world to change its flavor and reveal its beauty, just one life at a time, all to the glory of God. Amen.